I'm going to talk to you about appraisal. Little word of warning. I'm going to actually cover this subject in the way I believe, which is going to bother some people. If you need to flame me online, go for it. But I'm still going to go with this from what we've learned and what I really, really believe. Let's do it. So let's talk about appraisal. 1, what is appraisal? Appraisal is very simply a path to settle an insurance claim which you have not been able to settle with an insurance carrier. End of story. The goal of the appraisal is to set the amount of the loss. When you go to appraisal, the insured has an appraiser. The carrier will have an appraiser, and both of them will be disinterested, meaning they won't be the same people that were working on the claim before. Those two will assign an umpire. If they have a disagreement, the umpire will decide. The insured's going to pay their appraiser, the carrier's going to pay their appraiser, and the umpire is going to be split between the two. In my practice, about 8% of the time we go to the umpire, and so those fees are actually added to the mix. There's a lot of different ways that appraisal is billed. It's very often done by the hour. It's sometimes done by fixed rate, not very often, and it's sometimes done by a do not exceed type percentage, but still on an hourly basis. When you go into appraisal, you have to invoke it and tell the carrier, or the carrier can invoke it on you in most cases. The catch to remember is simply this, though. When you go into appraisal, we call it sudden death for a reason, because when it's done, it's done. I'm going to put some provisos on that in a minute, but when it's done, meaning when we sign the piece of paper by two of those parties, any two of them, then it becomes basically a settled claim. Now, the one caveat I'll put behind that, if there are things that are ambiguous, and oftentimes we'll find ambiguousness on ordinance and law, and sometimes we'll find ambiguousness on, say, content handling, content replacement. Sometimes we'll find, and very often we'll find, that additional living expenses, ALE, has some mystical part about it. So given that fact, sometimes we put that in as not appraised. So that way you still have that portion of the claim open, but so far as coverage A, which would be dwelling, that part would more or less always, in appraisal, be a settled matter where you couldn't go back and get any supplements or anything of that nature. Now, here's where I often differ from a lot of other people when we talk about appraisal. If you were to look at our actual contract for appraisal, one thing you'd notice on that contract is that it says that before you can sign our contract, you have to enlist counsel. You have to go to an attorney. You have to talk to them about your actual case and your actual claim, and talk to them about what their best moves are for the next steps in the claim handling. In some cases, that means they go to the attorney and the attorney says, whoa, no appraisal here. Don't do that. Which is fine. Because sometimes things don't belong in appraisal. Sometimes the counsel will actually take the insured and file suit on the claim, and then take it while under suit, put it into appraisal. And from my point of view, being inside suit and doing it behind an attorney in that way, inside suit, typically makes an appraisal move quicker, and honestly usually makes the characters that show up from both sides better. So I think there's a lot of benefit from being in that position. See, the attorneys, no matter where you are, but for example, in Florida, I'll give you a great example in Florida because attorneys get fees in Florida. I know it drives like certain people crazy, but the attorneys get fees in Florida. So they're not really losing anything to go to the attorney. And actually, if they were to file suit, it's just not a big deal. But you have this ability to touch all these tools in the quiver of the attorney that you don't have. And, you know, if you talk to a PA is usually going to advise you this exact same way. Of all the appraisal that I do, I mean, I'm talking tiny, tiny, tiny portion of that will come directly from the insured. Because even when they show up at our door coming directly from the insured, we're still going to send them back through that door to the attorney because the attorney has a better understanding of what that claim will mean. The attorney has the ability to look at policy, look at various language, look at behavior of the carrier, look at a host of other things that the appraisers never see. Appraisers don't care about policy. Appraisers care about the amount of the loss. The other reason I like to do this behind counsel is because sometimes terrible things happen inside of appraisal. Sometimes the characters that are there, whether they be umpire or appraiser, do something that is a foul in the process. It's not reasonable or appropriate in that venue. It could be something as simple as trying to enforce a policy provision in the middle of the appraisal. It could be something about putting a massive delay on the appraisal. It could be that they fail to make meetings, they fail to produce paper, they fail to do a whole number of things. Maybe fail to inspect a roof, fail to do any number of things that are typical and appropriate for doing the appraisal process. When those things happen, it may be appropriate to go to counsel and halt the appraisal or have the court direct the appraisers to act in a certain manner. I'm working on an appraisal right now where the opposing appraiser would not produce an actual estimate and the umpire had not seen fit to force it at that point, and it lingered and lingered and lingered, and finally the court made a decision to put a timetable on the appraisal panel. So we know exactly when the appraisers had to turn their work in, and we also know when exactly the umpire has to render their award. And that's phenomenal because we have an endpoint now. You know, we say in our game that there are, there are two kinds of things in the life. There's projects, and there's actual processes. And when we work a project, which it really is an appraisal, it should kind of have a definite beginning and a definite ending. And kind of what appraisal does is it puts that definite ending on most things, with the caveat of those things I told you that might come out and still be litigated or otherwise dealt with by the carrier. So often the adjusting process feels more like a process where it doesn't have any real definitive end to it. And I think that's really where the biggest rub is when you're playing this game, is that you want to get basically out of that process and into this project of closing this thing down and getting on with life. I hope this has helped some of you to understand. There's a lot of people, when I say that it'll bother some people, there's a lot of people who believe that appraisal is some kind of panacea that overcomes public adjusting and general adjusting and any legal work, and it is a thing all its own that can just make everything better. I think operating with appraisal in isolation is a dangerous business. I think that we go through all these processes in this game as a team, and having more tools in your quiver to get your claim done is always going to be wiser than having fewer. And if you're going to enter a sudden death sort of thing like appraisal, then definitely seek counsel before you do it or while you do it. If you're one of the people that listen to this, that are a contractor that gets put in an appraisal, or an insured that gets in an appraisal, the same thing that matters. The same rules apply. I want you to be made whole. Of course, I'm glad to help you. But I want you to get all the help you can get, not just some of it. And as your appraiser, I'm not the only support you have. I'm just part of the support you can have. Godspeed.
Yes, painting pictures for the culture, keep the brushes fresh. Flip the cover with the drummer, passion never rests. Freedom is our teacher, under pressure, now we blessed. See, I was so good for the goal. There's one art, one shot, now the future is yours. Go! Yeah, it's one art, one shot, now